for those who want to be in a relationship are the ones who struggle the most to end up in a relationship.
So what's the story behind? How did Nanaya get started at the very beginning? What made you head down this path?
So this was about 10 years ago. I had a girlfriend for about 2 years. After 2 years, I was like really gung-ho about the relationship. I was thinking about proposing, and she was taking a step back and wondering, well, do I really want to be in this relationship? And she put out the idea of wanting to do a cost-benefit analysis of the relationship. And so the light bulb went off in my head.
Always a good sign.
Right, yeah. And so, for me, like deep down, I'm thinking, well, that's not really how I would think about a relationship. But, the engineer in me is like, you know what, I bet I can build that. And so, just for fun, I decided to build it, not really to prove a point besides, I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, this is me as a scientist. Like, if you think you can do it, why don't you build it? And even if it's not really going to be for her, there's a lot of other folks that could benefit from it if it works, of course.
How do you know that it works?
Well, so when back when that happened, I started by making this prototype in Excel, and I wasn't I'm still not a trained psychologist, but I am an academic. So I went and consulted a lot of literature on like, this is how you do personality tests. This is how you show how people interact with groups of people. And I put together this, thousands of lines of Excel simulation of a relationship. And, I used it with her kind of as a joke because, again, I'm a scientist here. I don't want to say this thing's going to work unless I'm sure. So when I used it with her, I realized, wait a second, this thing actually seems like it's going to work. And surprise, the relationship didn't work out when it gets to the point of having to use Excel. But I thought I was onto something. And so I put out an ad on Craigslist, trying to meet up with strangers in cafes. And, so I met with all these strangers, a couple dozen, and I sat across the table and I asked them to talk about a relationship that they used to or still have. And, I interviewed them and I, took their answers and I put it into Excel and I smashed the button and it generated a report that predicted what their past decision ought to have been. And so, nowadays we talk about AI and machine learning to come up with a better algorithm. Well, this was kind of a human learning process. And after, about, 20, 30 or so people, I was able to tune all these parts of the algorithm that I wasn't sure about. So I was able to consistently predict the correct decision in the eyes of these people that they should have made in the past. So that gave me, I think, the confidence to come out with a product.
Wow. All right. So what is the relevance of the money question?
Yeah, so we do ask our users, I don't know if it's all of them or some of them, it depends where you live, how much money you make. And so a part of that is pretty straightforward. We also ask people, does it matter to you how much your partner makes? And so that's a part of our algorithm for figuring out the probability of running into that millionaire that you might dream of dating if you're looking for a sugar daddy or something. But the other part is we do research on this data. And, so we can go and, come up with conclusions on what are the outcomes and what are the experiences of people who have more wealth versus those who have less. And so, I can tell you that it is a little bit commingled with our age data, but in general, the people who make more money tend to be a little bit more pickier and they tend to have a little bit more adventurous sex lives. That's just the part of, benefits, I guess.
So a friend of mine got on Match.com and he put on his profile, "Don't contact me if you're not a millionaire." And he was contacted by celebrities. He then dated a celebrity. Someone you'd know the name of, matched him, sent him a message, and they dated for a while. Couldn't believe the boldness, but he just did it. He was like, "Yeah, don't contact me if you're not a millionaire."
One of the funniest things, and this is like it's come time and again in our research. one of the biggest determiners of your romantic outcome is confidence. You could just not even be looking for a relationship. You could be not interested in a relationship. But if you're confident, you're more likely to end up in a relationship than someone who isn't and still looking for a relationship. Is
that true of men and women? Or?
Yes. I mean, this is one of the biggest rules, or the biggest conclusions I think we've seen in our data. And I think if I had to tell anyone a piece of advice, anything you can do to build your self-confidence, just socially, that's just going to convey, I think, romantically as well.
So actually, why don't we talk about the other side of this, marketing, right? So you guys are a company, and how do people get the test? It's on the website. Is there an app?
So we had an app for many years, and so the way that this is, this has more or less been a side project for me for about a decade. And so, every couple of years I'll revisit it and I'll do new data studies. I'll put out a new product. So we had our last version of Nanaya come out in 2019 before COVID. And so we are about to come out with a new product, which is non-romance, and I can speak to that later. And so, really, I just do these data studies because I think we have a very fascinating data set. A lot of the inspiration I had was from like years ago when OkCupid had a really excellent blog where they just took their data and they showed, well, if you do this thing on your profile, you'll like be this more successful. Or, one of the more interesting studies they did was on racial bias in dating, which is, something that, I probably seen throughout my life personally, and something that throughout my friends as well. And so this was the inspiration, and no one else really does it. And so I'm very happy to be, someone that can provide this sort of knowledge for people because, maybe dating apps don't think it's interesting, but I absolutely think it does. I think it is. So whenever we do these data studies, I think it's very interesting to people, and people want to cover it. There'll be news stories, interviews like this, and I'm very happy to share this info with the world. And that's how people find out about Nanaya, and we get a lot of users just from that. Anymore.
So you don't advertise?
Very rarely. So we do some, separate, research for third parties, and everything is anonymous in the way that Nanaya is structured. And so whenever we do things like that, we end up doing a little bit of advertising. And the next product we're coming up with, rather than doing all this research a la carte, we're setting up a new platform. It's going to be called Better Survey in a few months. And so people can do brand research, market research, opinion research. So a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about, the data that we have, we want to be able to democratize our data set in a way that keeps people private, yet at the same time helps people make interesting, useful decisions for business and better understand the societies we're a part of.
Nice. So how did you got an article in Wired, right? How did you land that?
This is the thing, and this is actually part of our marketing strategy. So, I came from, government, I came from academia. And so, I had this very naive understanding back like 10 years ago of how you make it big. And so the way that Nanaya got anywhere was that I thought, well, kind of like today, we're talking today on Valentine's Day. And so I thought, big brain idea back when I was in grad school, why don't I do this big, marketing push for Valentine's Day? And so I came up with the algorithm for Nanaya. I put an academic white paper on Archive, and if anyone's in STEM academia, it's a very famous place you put your physics papers. So I was very used to it from that. I put up my theory paper on the love algorithm there, gave it a very clickbait title. I was just like, come on, let me try to fish a journalist here. And that's how it picked it up. And that's how I got the New Scientist interview. So I walked her through the algorithm. The journalist was a test user of the prototype, gave her a report, and we got that story. And ever since then, every time I do a data study, people, different outlets just want to be able to cover it for Valentine's Day. So we always try to time our launches, our data, press releases with Valentine's Day, and it tends to work out pretty well.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you joined us. All right, so predict my love life. Why is the prediction test longer than the personality test?
so that, so the prediction test, that is really what is all the info that we need for this really big algorithm. And so it's like, it depends who you are and how complex your life is. It can be many hundreds to about 1,000 variables. Not all of them that you necessarily see inside of the questionnaire that you're taking. And so, like, if you tell me you're going to be moving, in next year, you're going to go to a different city, and it might be one of 5 different cities that you're thinking about. We're spinning up all these like crazy calculations on the back end of our server to generate that model of all these different futures you may be a part of. And so that's why the prediction test is just a lot longer. That's like all the details about your life that we need to do a prediction. The personality quiz, we want to keep it short and sweet, not have a very painful user experience. And all we're doing is really predicting or telling you your love life. And we can do a very simple model of how long you'll be single based on your personality and a few other attributes.
Nice. So how long does it actually take to do each of them?
The personality quiz, maybe about 3 to 5 minutes, unless you do the premium version, then it's about maybe 7 to 10, because we're asking for a little bit more data that gives you a little bit more accuracy. And the prediction test can really be 15 minutes to 30 minutes. But as a result of it, you got, higher fidelity, the inputs, higher fidelity, the output, I'd like to say. So the more we know about people's lives, the better the prediction will be. And even knowing the cities you might move to, or the city you're currently in, or your age accurately makes a pretty big difference in the outcomes. So if you tell me you're 22 versus 30, everything else is the same, it's going to have a big impact on the outcome.
So privacy, let's talk about that. How do you make sure people's data are being kept securely? I imagine you may end out with potentially embarrassing things in some of these surveys, right?
So the first thing first, we used to have a Facebook login and we got rid of that a while ago. So we don't really know who's coming in to use Nanaya besides an email. And I'm sure for a lot of our users, that's like a throwaway email, and that's fine. So our user, PII, if you even want to call it that, is pretty disconnected from our data set. So, other than that, our data set really is anonymous, or it's just this sort of demographic metadata that, we don't really want to connect the two. Data privacy is pretty important to me as a user of many apps. I'm not big on social media. I value privacy, and I value my users' privacy as well.
Good. Yeah, privacy, increasingly important.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when we post more tech talks, interviews, and tutorials.